friends, Ashley Hawks here, watercolor artist. I am sure if you've been painting in watercolor for any amount of time that you have heard the term paper stretching. What does that mean? Does that mean taping your paper down to your table? What could it mean? Today I'm going to show you what it means, and I'm going to talk about how to achieve a perfectly stretched paper so that every single time you end up with a beautifully flat, ready for framing paper, not warped and buckled like when you don't stretch it. So stick with me and I'll show you how it's done.
So why on earth would you want to spend all the time to soak your paper, use a special kind of gummed paper tape, and spend all of this time measuring and cutting and all of the things just to have your paper stretched? Can't you just tape it down to a board and have it hold on that way? Well, the answers are in this video. I just want to show you really quick watercolor paper. So here I have some samples of some of my favorite paper, which is the Fabriano Artistico papers. There are different thicknesses. Now these papers are made of cotton. It's really important that you use cotton paper as a watercolor artist. You know, as you start getting more and more into watercolor, you want to start investing in better quality product. And cotton really is the way to go. Here is an example of two different thicknesses of paper. So here is your standard watercolor paper. This is 300 GSM, also known as 140 pound in the US. Let me just get those apart. And you can kind of see how thin the paper is. So there's that. But they also offer double thickness. Now this is 640 GSM, also known as 300 pound paper. It's a lot thicker. A lot of people will say if you get the thicker paper, if you get the 300 pound paper, the 640 GSM, that you do not need to stretch it. That's up to you. If you want to spend more money on paper that's thicker and doesn't warp and buckle and shrink,
It shrinks?
then by all means, do that. It is the way to go. If you don't want to stretch your paper and this just seems like a headache you don't want to have, you do you. I love it. That is such a great idea. I have used this and I do love it. I still stretch it though because I guess I'm a psycho. This thinner paper, do you see how beautifully flat this sheet of paper is? It's just beautiful. But once you paint on it, you end up with this. And I know that the color of these papers are different. This is the Artistico Extra White and this is their Natural White, but it is the same paper essentially. I believe that this is their soft press and this is their cold press. So those are minor differences, but it's the same thickness, same brand of paper. So you can see paper that has not gotten wet and paper that has. Look at the difference. It's got warps and buggles. It's not too bad. It's fine for me, but if I'm gonna be doing a pet portrait or something that I know I'm going to be selling, I really wanna make sure that it looks professional, it's ready to be framed. Here's another example of paper that I did not stretch before painting on. This was just a remnant actually. This did get stretched. And then I cut it off the board and then I used it again unstretched. So that's, I mean, try to frame that. You just can't. You cannot get it flat. Here's an example of a paper that I did stretch. And I think I need to replace the blade on my cutter because it's getting a little rough there. But do you see the difference? So unstretched paper and stretched paper. It's very straight.
Now let's talk about types of surfaces you can use to stretch the paper on. This is really important because they need to be waterproof, or you need to be able to have a way to waterproof them, because you will be putting a wet piece of paper down on, you will be painting water on the board. And so it needs to not be able to absorb that water. Here are a few surfaces that I have used. Now, this is just a piece of plywood that I bought from the hardware store. And most hardware stores will cut these for you if you ask nicely. My husband cuts mine for me. I do like to involve him in my art by asking him for help with certain projects, and he loves to help. But if you don't have someone who can help you and you don't have the tools or the skills to do this, you can ask the hardware store, and I believe they will cut these for you. These come in different sizes of sheets, I guess they're called. This is the back side. The back side here has not been sealed. However, the front side, and you'll have to excuse the painting I have taped on here, I have painted this board with latex paint, and it has started to kind of peel over time. If you use an exterior based paint, or you can even use a deck sealer or some kind of sealant to seal the wood so that it can't absorb moisture, then you'll be good to go, which is what I have done on this board. Here's another example, and this one, I still have some paper tape on here. I don't know if you can see this. I haven't cleaned this one off yet. This is the back side, and I did do one coat of sealant on this side of the wood, but as you can see, it wasn't enough. It's still not repellent. But this side is ready to go. And you can kind of see it has a little bit of a sheen to it. If I spray some water on it, it beads up. So that's what you want. Just a side note, to get this off, I just spray it and let it sit for a few minutes. And then I'll take a palette knife, and once it's all wet and starting to come off, I can just take my palette knife and scrape it off and wipe it all down, and it's ready to go for another paper. I am all for reusing, recycling, and repurposing. So this is actually a wooden puzzle board. So I just threw away the puzzle pieces and I repurposed the board. I went ahead and used the back side. I sanded it lightly, and then I painted it with external house paint. Will work just fine. And the reason it needs to be external is because a lot of the indoor latex paints, over time, if you leave water sitting on them, they will start to lift. So just make sure you're using a paint that is able to be water resistant over time. So this one has worked really well for me. This type of product, I believe you can buy in sheets as well. And I think it's called MDF. And you can buy this just in sheets at the hardware store as well and cut it up and use that. Just make sure, like I said, to go ahead and seal it with something. A final product I have used, and this one is very large. This actually, I think it is like the MDF board that I just mentioned. This one has been painted by a company because this came with an air conditioner unit that my husband installed on someone's property. So my point being with this is think outside the box. Try different things. I have heard people use signboard that you'll see when someone's selling their house or running for mayor. Don't go around stealing people's for sale signs. That would probably not be a good idea. But if somebody's throwing something out, try it. I've heard of people using gator foam board, and it's like an inch thick waterproof board. I have not personally been able to find it locally. However, it is available online. Some people use like a clear corrugated plastic. That can work. So do your research, think outside the box, go to your local hardware store, see what you can find. Look around your house, look around your garage. What could you find that you could potentially use to stretch paper on? And one more thing to keep in mind is the size of the paper you'll be stretching. So for me, I do pet portraits. I always do them around 11 by 14. And then you're also going to want to account for how much overlap you're going to have, because in the end you will be cutting off this edge, or even just cutting it to here, and then you can mat it and cover this up. However, I like to cut off the paper tape because I just don't like the way that it looks. I'm handing my paintings over to a client. I want it to look professional. And so that's just something you need to keep in mind when you're choosing the size of your board and having those cut. You can go bigger and then just put smaller pieces of paper on a larger board. I actually have an example of that right here. So here's a really large one. In fact, I can't even fit this in the frame. It's so large. And the reason I like this is an 11 by 14 sheet of paper. And I have a lot of space. It's great. You can set this on your desk. You can tilt it if needed. I can set other supplies on the side and just use this as part of my desktop. So that's something to keep in mind. Maybe cut your boards bigger and then you'll have more options when it comes to stretching.
Before I even start working, something that I always do is use some rubbing alcohol and paper towels or cloth. In this instance, I use baby wipes because that's all I had with me in the room. And so I really think it's important to clean my surface where I'm working before I get started so that I can have that beautiful, grease-free, clean space. You know, us artists, sometimes we have paint splatters that we're not aware of, and you just don't want that on your paper that you're stretching. So give your desk a clean, fresh start, like I am here in this video. Isn't it satisfying? Clean desk. Love it. And that is the other reason why I wear gloves when I do this process, because I really don't want the grease from my hands to go on the nice white clean watercolor paper that I'm working with. Now I'm getting my supplies ready. Before I ever get any water out, I am getting my gummed paper tape out and I'm going to start cutting it. I'm going to cut my paper to size, and here I have a few pieces of paper that are ready to go. These are probably around 11 by 14, like I said. And the reason I'm doing this ahead of time before getting any water out is that gummed paper tape you see sitting there on the left side of the screen. If that gets wet, you are going to ruin the entire roll of paper because it is water activated. So get your gummed paper tape out, size it, cut it, get it ready, and then put it out of the way before any water enters the picture. I have made this mistake, so just learn from me and do this before you get water involved. You will thank me. This is the process by which I go ahead and cut my pieces of gum paper tape ahead of time. I just pull it out, measure it. I want to be able to cover the 4 sides of the paper. And that one didn't quite fit. I was thinking maybe I could make it work, but it really is best to make sure that you're using one full piece for each side. You will get better adhesion because as that cotton fiber starts to dry, it is going to pull really hard on your gummed paper tape. So you want to make sure you've got good adhesion. Now it's time to start measuring. Oh, I guess now it's time to start putting gloves on. Voiceover Ashley doesn't always know what she's talking about, so you'll have to forgive me. Gotta get those gloves on, get ready. Oh yeah. Okay, next I'm gonna grab my ruler and I am going to measure from each corner. I will be measuring a 1/2 inch. So it looks like the gum paper tape is about 1.5 inches. So about a 1/2 inch of that is going to cover the edges of the paper. So I will be measuring a 1/2 inch on each side. And then once I've got those measured, I'm going to draw a line, and that's going to be the map where I put my gummed paper tape. I have done this before without doing the measurements, and it's fine, but it's not always precise. So it's better if you want a precise cut in the end. If you are going to cut off the edge with the gummed paper tape, it is best to have a precise line. Gotta get all 4 sides in there. All right, did you see me scooch that gummed paper tape out of the way? Because this, and I probably should have put it even further away. I'm cringing right now watching this. I'm using distilled water. We have well water, and we do have iron in our water that could potentially yellow my paper over time. I don't know for sure. So just to be safe, I'm using distilled water. Okay, next I'm gonna grab my soft, flat brush, and my sponge. This is a sponge I purchased specifically for paper stretching. And I'm going to use the soft side. It does have an abrasive side. I'm going to wring it out so that it's just damp. Imagine you're licking a stamp. That's the wetness that you want it to have. Because this sponge is essentially going to be your tongue if you're licking a stamp. Okay, so I flipped my paper over to the back side and now I'm just painting that water on, and I'm doing this so gently. I do not want to inadvertently remove that sizing that is on the paper. And so I'm going to go ahead and make sure every inch of this paper is saturated, and I'm going to use a lot of water. Some people soak their water in a basin before doing this process, but I have found that that is completely unnecessary. Just make sure you get a good amount of water on the back side. And then see the shine? You can spot problem areas that didn't get wet by just kind of tilting it around, looking and making sure it's completely shiny. And once it is, go ahead and flip it over. And this is going to be their front side of the paper. Now it's time to wet the front side. Make sure you do the same process on the front. Make sure even to go over the edge, because you want that paper to really soak in that water. Then I'm going to lift it up and make sure if there's any bubbles underneath. Sometimes it happens where there will be like a little spot that has a bubble. I just make sure it's completely smooth and flat. See how shiny that is? Now I'm going to give it a few minutes. I usually do, say about 5 minutes. You want the paper to be like, it's going to be like a wet cloth when it's soaked in that water thoroughly. So I'm going to say about 5 minutes. All right, now that it's time to actually stretch the paper, I'm going to make sure my sponge is still damp. And then I'm going to take a paper towel, ideally. All I had was Wendy's napkins, don't judge. And I'm going to go ahead and remove some of the excess moisture. I mean, you can see that the paper now resembles a wet cloth, but you don't want it too wet. So there's kind of a balance. I'm going to go ahead and wipe the edges mostly with that paper towel. You can use a clean, dry cloth. You can use, like I have here, this is a cloth napkin. I do wash these by hand in the sink because I don't want any fabric softener residue left on them. That's really important to me. And I'm going to make sure that we've just removed a lot of that excess moisture. It is okay if there's still water, if there's still that sheen in the center of the paper. But if you have too much, like I said, that water is going to leak under that paper tape, and as the paper is drying, it's going to lift that paper tape. So there is a balance. So now I'm using my sponge just like a tongue, like licking a stamp. And I'm using that to wet the gummed paper tape on the shiny side. I like to take my cloth and use that to kind of help get a good adhesion there. And then on my specific board, I'm going to have to wrap the paper tape around the edge. Depending on the board, sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. So this is kind of a trial and error. This has taken me quite a long time to perfect this. So I usually do one side and then I do the side right next to it. So I don't do the long side and then the long side at the bottom. I'm going to do the long side and then I'm going to do the short side adjacent. And this one doesn't need to wrap around the edge, so it's a lot easier when it doesn't. And like I said before, if your board is much larger than your paper, I do feel like that gives you a better chance of things not lifting once it's dried. And what I'm doing kind of is pressing down, but I'm also still absorbing some of that excess water as I go. Now I'm going to do the other long side at the bottom. And as you can see, I'm lining it up with my pencil marking that I made earlier. And as you wrap the gummed paper tape around the edge, you want to make sure to take your cloth and just press down really good so that you get a good adhesion. I did struggle with this last piece here because it did get a little bit of water on one of the edges. So that's another reason you want to make sure that that paper tape stays out of the way when you're working with water. All right, final side. I find this process to be highly therapeutic. In fact, I will do sometimes 7 boards at a time, just on a Friday night, turn on a movie, turn on a podcast. It's something that I actually enjoy doing. If I didn't enjoy it, I wouldn't be doing it. There's just nothing like painting on a properly stretched piece of paper. I've tried blocks. They're good, but I do still find that when you're working with a block, you're still having buckling. So it's not a for sure deal even with a block. You can use the 600 GSM paper. I found a hair on my paper. That's what I'm doing there. What I was saying was I've tried using the double thickness paper, and while it doesn't buckle and warp as much, I was really frustrated with that little hair on my paper. We had a cat in the house last year and she loved my studio. So every now and then I will find that stray cat hair. It's maddening. Gotta make sure that I don't leave anything on that paper. All right, that one's finished. All right, once we are finished applying the gummed paper tape and we feel confident about what we've done, we want to set this aside somewhere. You're going to lay it flat, horizontal, make sure there's nothing on top of it, and you're going to wait about 24 hours before attempting to paint on it. I do like to check mine periodically to make sure that as it's drying, the paper tape isn't lifting. That has happened to me in the past. As you can see, I do have remnants of another type of paper tape here. And this was the paper tape I believe purchased at Blick Art Supply. I was not a fan. It was horrible. It just did not stick. I don't know if it had to do with the type of glue that's on it, but I do not recommend the gummed paper tape from Blick. The one that I purchased is found on Amazon. I will post the link to that and any other supplies that I used today down in the description. So please be sure to check that. So what is it like painting on a stretched piece of paper? I would like to show you. Let's paint, shall we? I've got some pretty colorful paints here. Let's see what it's like. I've got a pretty big brush here. Let's see what this bad boy can do. Look how much water is on this paper. And just a side note, this puppy's got enough capacity to hold water. It could baptize a cat. Okay, this has been sitting for about 15 minutes, and I just want to show you. So you will start to see some puffing up, a little bit of buckling and waving. However, as this dries, it is going to re-shrink down again, because as you're adding water, the cotton fibers are expanding, and that's why we get some of that buckling. But don't be afraid, and don't give up and cut your painting off while it's wet. You absolutely would defeat this whole process if you were to do that. It's really important to wait and allow your painting to fully dry I usually wait 24 hours. You want to make sure it's dry. One way that you can tell if a painting is completely dry is by placing your hand on it. If it still feels a little bit cold to the touch, then you know it's not fully there yet. So have some patience and wait until it's fully dry before cutting the painting off the board. Okay, now this is a painting that I did yesterday, and that video will be coming up next week. But I want to show how the process goes when I'm ready to remove the paper from the board. So what you'll need for this is one of these, like a box cutter. You can use an X-Acto blade, and I like to use a metal ruler. You don't have to, you can just cut it by sight, but today I'm going to go ahead and use something to push against. This blade's a little dull, so I'm going to switch to my other one. Here's a smaller one. You really don't need much. And as you can see over time, I have cut and cut and cut so many times on this board. You do start to get cuts in the board, and that's okay. I haven't had an issue. I'm sure eventually I will need to resurface this with paint or primer or a sealant of some kind, but for now it's fine. You don't want to press too hard on this because you don't want to cut into the board too much. It doesn't take a lot. It really doesn't. Let me show you. Because there is a little gap between the paper and the board. And so that's where you're going to want to place your blade. Well, let's do it. I'm just going to line up my metal ruler or edge. It doesn't have to be a ruler, just some sort of flat edge to kind of give you something to keep your line straight. And I'm very gently just dragging it along. Now we're going to do that on the upper edge. Oh, did you hear the crack? This paper is pulled so incredibly tight that when it finally releases one of the edges, you actually hear a cracking sound. It's very satisfying. There it is. There's that satisfying crack that I love so much. You don't get that with a block because paper that's been put into a block hasn't been wet first. It's just paper that's been sandwiched together and then glue put on the edges. If that's your preference, by all means, that is totally fine. But for those of you who've wondered about this process, here you go. Okay, here she is. Would you look at how flat that is? And I'm sure if you're here, you have tried to frame a painting that was not properly stretched. When you try to frame it flat, you get these waves and buckles. Now, there are ways to flatten a painting after painting it. Those videos are all over YouTube. That's not something that I specialize in. It's not something that I want to try to do. I do know that you can re-wet the back and then you can flip it over and just protect the front while you put books on it and let it dry. That is one way you can do that. Hope that this has helped you. If you have questions, please put them down in the comments. I would love to answer any and all questions that you may have, and I hope you have enjoyed this process. Thank you for coming, and I will see you later.